It is time for Best Bets this week in college football, presented by FanDuel. I'm Chris Hassel with Danny Kanell and Chip Patterson. Neither one had a good week. In fact, Danny, you brought Chip down with you to your level.
I was going to say, hey, I caught a win on him, but since I fired away, I actually did lose a game to him, maybe two.
And now you have you've officially reached the 100 loss mark for the season. You're at 102 Dalmatians there. Chip, thanks for joining us, man. I'll let you lead us off on Purdue at number 2, Ohio State. We're going to kind of go in order of game times this week. This is a sleepy noon game in Columbus with the Buckeyes coming off that high in Happy Valley.
Yeah, hold your nose and take this one because we've seen Ohio State get off to slow starts. It is, as you mentioned, a potential hangover or letdown. And this is why I say hold your nose, though, because I've got Purdue in the first half plus 21.5. Now, it's possible Purdue will not score any points in the first half. After all, their team total for the game is at 6.5. But if they do, I think that we might be able to walk this one all the way to the window. Can Ryan Walters get this team in the shoe with an early start, playing with a little bit of fight? Even a field goal might be able to create enough wiggle room because, again, Ohio State all season long has been a little bit slow starting. The other half of being the best third quarter team in America is that you're not always great in the first half. So let's go Purdue plus 21.5 in the first half.
I ain't going to touch that side. I'm going to go ahead and lay them here with the Buckeyes. I just wish Will Howard had grown up a Boilermaker fan so he could go in that chip on his shoulder. But after that pick 6, he bounced back, really was impressed with him. His leadership, that's what I love about him. Feels like he's taking ownership of this team, starting to become more of a vocal presence on that squad. I think that's what has them ready to go from the start. I think you could call your number against this Purdue team, which has really been struggling. We saw Oregon go into there after their big win against Ohio State. Didn't have any struggles whatsoever. They won by 35. I think Ohio State does something similar. I'll lay them here with the number.
Yeah, Purdue, the only Big Ten team that doesn't have a conference win yet this season. That one's not going to be close. Danny says it's going to be at least 38. Let's move on to another noon game. It's Miami, number 4 in the playoff poll, minus 10.5 in Atlanta against Georgia Tech. Danny, this is the rematch that didn't take a knee game last year. Mario Cristobal's come a long way since then.
Yes, he has. Although he did try to run up the score against Manny Diaz and almost got Cam Ward killed at the end of last game. So I don't know if that was the best clock management, but I actually had Miami last week, laid the points with them against Duke and was sweating that one out and then got the late game cover. Here's the thing with this Georgia Tech game. I actually like Georgia Tech with the points here. It's a big number, but keep an eye on Haynes King, that injury status. Is he playing? Is he not playing? If he's playing, I feel great about this. If he's not so much. I think this Georgia Tech team is pretty talented. I think their defense will have a game plan to slow down, not give up the massive play. And basically, I'm going with the theme of the season for the Miami Hurricanes. They kind of, we use that term, play with their food a lot. They always come out there, and Cam Ward is good for at least one of those throw back across your body pick, and sometimes it's a pick 6, but it's a really foolish throw. One of these times, I think it could cost them a game. Not in this one, but I think it could cost them a cover on the road after that game last weekend at noon. I think they come up just short. I'll take Georgia Tech in those 11.5 points.
Yeah, big-time assignment for defensive coordinator Tyler Santucci, getting the Yellow Jackets defense ready to try to slow Cam Ward. And as Danny mentioned, keep your eye on the Haynes King side of this if you're going to make this investment yourself. But I am also here going to take Georgia Tech and these points. If Haynes King plays, I think that Georgia Tech has a real chance to score enough to be able to hang inside this number and maybe even make it a little bit of a high-scoring back and forth. But the real key here is the rhythms of the season for Georgia Tech, because we know that Georgia Tech against ranked ACC opponents, Brent Key has been phenomenal at just bursting the dreams and being an upset darling. And what did Georgia Tech do last week? They had an off week to get healthy and get ready for Miami. What does Georgia Tech have next week? Another off week. It's a Super Bowl island for Georgia Tech. Got to think that they're going to pour it out with everything they've got. So I will take Georgia Tech I will take the points. But again, keep your eyes on the quarterback injury situation before firing on it yourself.
Yeah, you'll have to do that for this next game as well, with Florida going to number 5 Texas. DJ Lagway, Danny, has not been ruled out yet. At this point in the week, we don't know if he's going to play.
I think he'd be crazy to play, especially considering what their schedule has. I don't think this game is winnable with him, but I think the next two are at home with Ole Miss and LSU. I think Florida's going to be completely overmatched here, but I'm going to go ahead and tackle the over in this game. I think Texas is able to put up some points. They're coming off a bye week. They need to get some offense going. And last week, I know people looked at the scoreboard in the Florida-Georgia game. They're like, oh my goodness, it's 20-20. Well, that was thanks to Carson Beck throwing 3 interceptions in that one. I think this game is all Texas. I think there might be some garbage points late, which is why I'm taking the over here. But I think that Texas could get to their number close on their own. I'll go over the 48.5.
Okay. Let's either get some separation or let Danny back in this thing, because I am on the under. The best unit on the field in this game is Texas's defense. That's because the downfield passing attack, which on paper for Texas looks fantastic, just has not been as threatening. And I do think that Florida's defense has done a good job of playing really hard. They are not loaded up with as much talent as the Georgia Bulldogs, for example, that caused a lot of problems for Texas's offense early in the season, but I do think they are talented enough to not just get totally blown out of the water. Obviously, I might have a little bit of an edge here in case this number drops with DJ Lagway being out. But again, with the way that Texas's defense has played this season, even if DJ Lagway tries to give it a go, I've got to assume he's going to be a little bit limited and a little bit hobbled. So Texas's defense runs the day, while Steve Sarkisian maybe not necessarily trying to pull everything out of the playbook, knowing that even a spring game playbook can get you a double-digit win.
There are only 2 ranked-on-ranked matchups this week. They're both in the SEC, so we're sticking right there. It's number 3 Georgia at Ole Miss. Georgia, 2.5-point favorite. Some demons for Kirby Smart to try to exercise in this one because, Danny, the only other time that he's gone there as the head coach at Georgia was 2016, his first season. It was his worst defeat as Georgia head coach.
I did not know that, but it makes me feel better about my pick in this game. This pick reminds me a lot of what we saw last week when Texas A&M went to South Carolina, and South Carolina was a 2.5-point home dog. And be like, what's wrong with this number? Georgia, being ranked higher, being a preseason favorite to win the national championship, feels like they should be a better favorite in this one. But if you've watched this team play, you've seen the struggles that I referenced earlier, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Carson Beck, 3 picks against Alabama, 3 picks against Georgia, 3 picks against Florida. He is struggling to see the field, and it's affecting his confidence. Now he's got to go on the road in a game that Ole Miss has had circled for some time. Jackson Dart is the better clear-cut advantage quarterback in this matchup, and I think Ole Miss's defense is the thing that gives me the confidence they can not only cover this number, but win the game outright. Give me Ole Miss in those 2.5.
I think both of these offenses are going to struggle running the football. Georgia, because they're going up against an Ole Miss defensive front that's been absolutely fantastic. And then Ole Miss, because the offensive line has been dealing with some injury issues, got healthy going into the Arkansas game. But now they're not going to have Henry Parrish Jr., their leading rusher, as well. To me, that seems like a lot of empty possessions early in the game. Now, I recognize there is a ton of talent on the field. So when it comes time for maybe a little bit more desperation, a little less conservative play calling, we might get some splash plays in the second half. So that's why I'm going back to a principal play that I had to get away from for a little bit, but it's treated me well over the years, and that is a first half under in some of these big Georgia games. And so I think with respect being given to Ole Miss defensively and Georgia defensively as well, remembering what those Bulldogs did the last time they were on the road in a big game, absolutely squeezing the life out of Texas. I think this one's a little bit slow before it gets loose. I will go first half under 27.5.
All right, our big game on CBS this week in the Big Ten is Michigan, the defending champs, suffered 4 losses already, at an Indiana team that is blowing everybody out. And Danny, you lit one up a little bit earlier today with the SIG, Coach Cignetti.
I did, and you know what? He's my new best friend. We actually took like 5 extra minutes. We're kicking it around. The interview's over, and we're talking about Pittsburgh. It's where my dad's from. It's where he started as a graduate assistant at Pitt in the early 80s when Dan Marino was on the squad there. But, man, how can you not love this story and what it's meant for college football and what it's meant to the Indiana Hoosiers? First time in program history, they've been 9-0, and it has been sensational. Dominating every single game, winning by 2 touchdowns or more. And even when they face adversity, whether it's without Curtis Rourke or whether it's returning with pins in his thumb, it doesn't matter. I love the fact that I got this number under 14-2, that critical number, 13.5. I'll lay them all day long. Keep your eye out for Mikhail Kamara on the defensive side of the ball. He leads the Big Ten in sacks and tackles for loss. Their defense in film study was really what jumped out to me. We know about their prolific offense, how good it's been. Their defense, I think, is good enough to shut down Michigan's offense, which is struggling. Back in Bloomington, I think it's a big win, especially the fact they were disrespected by the College Football Selection Committee. I think it's a statement win for the Hoosiers.
Winning every single game by double digits and winning every single quarter, because this is a team that plays to the whistle, the final whistle, the whistle at the end of 60 minutes. I have been amazed at the way the Hoosiers get better throughout the game. So Michigan State just last week gets off to a little bit of a hot start, right? 10-0, and then you just see what happens over the course of the game, because Michigan State had less than 100 yards in the second quarter. They had about 25 yards of offense in the third quarter. And in the fourth quarter, Michigan State had 0 net yards of offense in the whole daggum quarter. I have just been loving watching Indiana, the way they compete, because winning these fourth quarters, like you see on the screen right now, that comes down to coaching. That comes down to Curt Cignetti putting a relentlessness mindset into his team. And so that's where I'm going to be going again, because while Michigan kind of feels like they're playing out the string, Indiana knows they're competing for championships.
And Indiana is looking to notch a 10-win season for the first time ever. They're the only Big Ten school that has never won 10 in a season. If and when they get this done this week, that will be that. Chip Patterson and Danny Kanell picking every game against the spread here in college football. And that game will start at 3:30 Eastern time on Saturday on CBS and streaming on the Paramount Plus app. We'll pick more afternoon games up next, including Colorado Buffaloes now in the hunt in the Big 12. Might they make a run to the college football playoff? We'll pick their game and many more next. We're picking every ranked matchup this week. Every ranked team that's in action. Clemson almost fell out of the rankings after losing to Louisville, snapping a 6-game winning streak. They're on the road in Blacksburg against Virginia Tech. Iowa State lost their perfect season. They are taking on Kansas this week. Colorado coming off a bye, right now in second place in the Big 12, tied with Iowa State right there against Texas Tech. Let's pick these games. Clemson -6.5 at Virginia Tech. Chip, what's your feel on this one? We know it's going to be a great environment in Blacksburg.
Yeah, I mean, can Clemson get off the mat after one of the most disappointing results of the last, maybe 8 years for Clemson football, to lose by double digits as a double-digit favorite at home at night against Louisville, an opponent you've absolutely owned? I am very concerned about the overall psyche. But in terms of the best bet here, I am concerned about Clemson's ability to get stops. Now, Virginia Tech is dealing with some injury issues on offense, definitely something worth monitoring, but I still think this is a Hokies team that should be able to move the football against the Tigers defense that's been a little bit porous. On the other side, Virginia Tech's defense, I think, is not going to be able to have any answers for Cade Klubnik in a big-time revenge game. So when I think about Clemson getting up off the mat, I don't think it's going to be by squeezing the life out of the Hokies. I think it's going to be by flexing their muscles with Cade Klubnik, with Bryant Wesco, with Phil Maffa. So I'm actually going to go with the over 53.5 in this game.
You mentioned, that was a crushing blow to Clemson. And you're wondering about how they get themselves back off the mat. Something they've done a lot in the last 5 years, because they've been losing all of a sudden some of these games and falling short of expectations. I'm going to say they don't get off the mat this time. Now, maybe they do, and it's a field goal win, but I love Virginia Tech playing at home. Now, injuries do become a concern when you're losing your best running back potentially. He's not sure if they're playing Tootin or not, and Kyron Drones, so I would keep an eye on that if you're hesitant to take that number. But I'm going to say Virginia Tech plays here. All of a sudden, teams are looking at Clemson differently as well, where you have that intimidation factor. This is a team that has ruled the ACC for a lot of time and not the last few years. I think Virginia Tech realizes they have something special potentially brewing and have, a wounded, ego-hurt team coming to town. I'm going to take the Hokies in the 6.5 at home.
Blood in the water, and they're circling Dabo there in Blacksburg, Virginia. Let's go to the Big 12. Iowa State finally lost a game last week, Danny. They are 2.5-point favorites at Kansas. At Kansas.
Oh, they were undefeated.
They were until I dressed up as Josh Pate, the Cyclone fan, and it's Iowa State September, October on the left, Iowa State in November on the right.
That's right.
I put the at Kansas in quotation marks because this game is at Arrowhead, and there's a good chance there will be more Iowa State fans there than Kansas fans.
It doesn't matter to me. I think the number should jump out at you, right? It's one of those fishy lines where you're like, wait a second, Kansas is 2-6. And Iowa State, is a one-loss team that was in the top 15 most of the season. Beware of the Kansas Jayhawks. Lance Leipold is going to have this team primed and ready. And even though their record is 2-6, they have been oh so close. One possession in almost every single loss that could have flipped the tide, and they could be a 6-2 or a 7-1 team, including against Kansas State when they had them on the ropes in the Sunflower Showdown until the last play of the game when Kansas State kicked the winning field goal. Coming off a bye, getting healthy, Iowa State bouncing back after a devastating loss at home. Give me the Jayhawks. Even though it's at Arrowhead, I like them to win this game. I'll take the points, but I think they could win this game outright.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. This is when you buy into teams that have great coaching, and Lance Leipold is a great coach because, as you mentioned, they went to Manhattan at Kansas State, and they were going blow for blow with the Wildcats. They are absolutely capable of winning this football game. This is when I'm also going to come back to Lance Leipold's recent history against Matt Campbell and Iowa State, because 2 years ago, the Kansas Jayhawks found themselves as a 3-point underdog, and they won outright. Just last season, Kansas found themselves as a 3-point underdog to Iowa State, and again, they won outright. Does Lance Leipold have an edge on Matt Campbell? Recent results suggest they do, and I'm going to buy into that. So I'm going rock chalk. And like Danny said, would not be surprised if they win it outright.
All right, it feels right that you guys are back to fade in the Cyclones. Maybe that'll turn their season around. Let's move to unbeaten Army. The only team that has yet to trail this season, disrespected, I would say, by the committee, barely ranked, even though they are perfect. Only a 5.5-point favorite, though, at North Texas.
The schedule's getting trickier for them. That's one thing. And Bryson Daly, the injury bug has all of a sudden cropped out. A surprise scratch from last week's game due to injury. Where is his health? It's one of the best players in the country, and their offense just wasn't quite the same. If he plays, I'm not changing my play either way, because I look at this Army scoring offense, really impressive. 37.9 points per game. That's incredible. Guess what? North Texas is averaging over 40 points a game with Chandler Morris at the helm by way of Oklahoma, by way of TCU, now at North Texas, playing really good football at the quarterback position, them orchestrating this offense. Give me the over, because I do think North Texas is vulnerable playing against this offense. You don't get much practice against it. I think Army will be able to score no matter who's playing QB. I think North Texas will be able to score as well. I'll take a high-scoring affair. Give me the over.
That's not a good idea. That's not the way that Army wins this game. That's not the way that Army is able to get in and out of this game still undefeated, still in first place in the American Athletic Conference. You need to limit the number of times that this North Texas offense touches the ball. And one of the ways you do that is with those long ground heavy possessions. And one thing that this North Texas defense has not shown the ability to do, especially in recent weeks against the better rushing offenses, is get stops and get off the field. So this is where, if you are Army, and if you do have to go another week with Dwayne Coleman, the backup quarterback under center, if it's going to be a lot of Kanye Udo just trying trying to just churn it up at 4 or 5 yards at a time, I think that is a great game plan to make sure that you win this football game. I am actually on the under 63.5 here.
All right, so Army's 25. They're ranked behind a 2-loss Colorado team, back in the rankings from Coach Prime. And a really interesting game here on the road at a Texas Tech team that was that team that knocked off Iowa State last week, Danny.
Yes, and that was a beautiful drive that Baron Morton orchestrated in the late closing minutes of that game to get the win. Taj Brooks, by the way, one of the best backs in the Big 12 and maybe in the entire country, where he sits 5th in the rushing ranks. This is a really tough spot for Colorado to go into Lubbock, which the place is going to be rocking. Joey McGuire's got a really good relationship with Deion Sanders, having coached his son, Deion Sanders Jr., all the way back at Cedar Hill in Texas. There's a lot of healthy respect. But this is a game I think Texas Tech thinks they can win. I think this is a tough football game. I'm going to say Texas Tech. I'm going to take the points. I know I've been here before. I think they get the ground game going. I think Shedeur plays great. I think it's a fun matchup back and forth. Give me Texas Tech in the points and maybe even the upset after that big win they got last week.
So I'm looking at, the Texas Tech profile, right? What do you do well? What do you not do well? Because this Texas Tech defense, oh gosh, they're a little bit banged up. And oh no, they rank number 110 in pass defense. I don't think that's a good thing going up against one of the best quarterback wide receiver duos in the entire country, Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter. I think Colorado's offense is going to be able to score. Now, what does Colorado's defense do against Baron Morton? Because you mentioned it, like the Buffs defense has played better, but they haven't had to go up against a combo like Morton and Brooks like Texas Tech has in the backfield. So for me, I'm going to attack the Colorado team total. It is the thing I am the most confident in. So we're going to go Buffs team total over 33.5, thinking that Texas Tech pass defense that has been so porous, they end up giving up a lot of yards and a lot of points to Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter.
All right, Colorado in second place in the Big 12, but they need to win out and get a little bit of help to get into the Big 12 championship game, potentially get into the playoff. Let's go to the #1 team in the land, the Oregon Ducks, laying 25 at home against Maryland, Danny.
It's a big number, but they haven't faced big game Billy Edwards just yet.
Oh.
Big game Billy Edwards took down USC in a win with 373 yards passing. He took down Virginia from the ACC. He's also lost some games, too, and I'm not predicting the upset, but I do think this Mike Locksley-led offense, with him calling the shots, I think this is a total backdoor situation where Oregon, let's just say they're playing a little close to the vest, right? They don't want to get more guys hurt. We saw the Tez Johnson injury last week. The good news, he'll be back. I think they just want a very business-like approach. We talked about the late game cover they had against Michigan. I think this game could unfold similar, whether it's control from start to finish, but Maryland trying to keep this respectful, throwing it around late, gets that backdoor cover. So I'll take those 25 points, even though it's on the road.
Longtime fans of this Top 25 Pick segment understand there are wells. And when the well still has water, we go back to it. Because in the first half, against teams not named Ohio State, Oregon does a phenomenal job of putting teams away. 28-10, 35-3, 21-0, 28-10. The first half spreads have been absolute moneymakers for the Oregon Ducks. I was standing there on the field, sweating it out as Michigan got a couple early scores, but I don't even know why I was sweating, because Dylan Gabriel has this thing, and the Ducks were relentless with a couple of scores in the second quarter to be able to get that first half cover. It is the way Oregon handles its business, and it is the way we win when we're making picks on Oregon games.
Go back to that well until it runs dry. Chip Patterson, love the way he's thinking, going to first half Oregon for the 4th time this season. We have more games to pick, including another ranked on ranked game, and it looks... All right, let's look at some of the next games we're going to pick. Night games on Saturday, and Tennessee, huge favorite at home. Oh, God, Danny, Florida State. Oh, God.
Yeah.
That's going to get ugly.
Could.
At Notre Dame. And then Bama, LSU, and we'll pick a few other games as well. Let's start with Tennessee and Mississippi State. The line's 23.5. Potential look-ahead spot here, Chip, because Tennessee is heading to Georgia next week.
Yeah, I'm actually targeting not necessarily a look ahead as much as you got to get this engine running right, because we have not seen Tennessee's offense really performing at its peak, much like it did in the opening weeks of the season in a long time. And the other thing that stands out to me, not just for this season, but even through Josh Heupel's career as Tennessee's head coach, you used to be able to bank on really strong starts. And against Kentucky, they did not get off to a strong start. No, against Alabama, they did not get off to a strong start. So what I'm targeting here is that in Mississippi State, Josh Heupel and this offensive coaching staff have an opportunity to get Nico in a rhythm, to get Dylan Sampson running early, to allow that offensive line to get a push against a Mississippi State defense that is very vulnerable. So what happened to the Tennessee that I love? I hope that we'll find it here. Let's go Tennessee with a fast start, first quarter, -6.5.
I'm going to go ahead and tackle the whole game. Nico, I thought, played his best game, or one of them, against Kentucky last week. Starting to see the field a little bit better. I thought the game-winning touchdown pass against Alabama was a huge confidence boost for the young quarterback who's been a little bit of a roller coaster ride all season long. And guess what you need to get that offense revved up? As you mentioned, Chip, you need to face Mississippi State, a team that is struggling mightily. So I think Tennessee goes out start to finish, dominates the game, builds up that confidence before that matchup with Georgia. I'll lay the points here.
All right, let's move on to that Florida State-Notre Dame game. I do have one piece of good information for Florida State fans.
Great.
Marcus Freeman has lost 2 games straight up as a 20-plus point favorite. And, Danny, we saw it earlier this season with Northern Illinois. So is there a chance for your Noles?
There's always a chance. Am I going to take that chance? I am not. I think there are 2 possible outcomes for this game as far as the score goes. I think 35-7 is one, and I think 42-0 is the other. It has been that type of season. Both of those would get a Notre Dame cover and under the total of 42.5. So I will go ahead and lay them with Notre Dame. Florida State has turned this season into an exhibition. Really, I mean, they're trying young talent. They're rolling multiple quarterbacks. The young talent's been overwhelmed, but they're learning through the process. Notre Dame needs style points to stay in that conversation. I think they can pretty much call the score if they want to. I'm very concerned about Florida State's mental psyche playing on the road. Once they get down a couple spots, feels like they've thrown in the towel. I don't know if this one's any different. So I'll go ahead and take Notre Dame and the under.
But love both of those scores that you just threw out there, Danny, because both of them would be a winner for me backing the side of this that I do feel confident in, and that is Notre Dame's offense, because Riley Leonard, as we've discussed on the Cover 3 podcast, continues to get better and better. He's become a more well-rounded offensive threat, and the offense, after all of the hand-wringing about how that offensive line was going to do after suffering a lot of injuries in the preseason and the early weeks of the year. Man, and they are running the football well. Leonard's moving it through the air. I just think that Notre Dame's offense needs to be performing at a peak level so that they can have those kind of scores that will impress the committee. You are right that eye test and style points are all things that factor into my pick here. So does also 34.5, a nice half point under 35. So let's go Notre Dame team total over 34.5.
And Riley Leonard might have a little extra something, because last year his Blue Devils went into Doak late in the season, kind of had Florida State on the ropes a little bit. Then he got injured. Florida State came back and won that game. Let's go to a game that's being billed as an elimination game in the SEC. Alabama at LSU. Bama a slight favorite. Danny, are you going to try to say that even the winner of this game is still eliminated from playoff contention?
Yeah, they just don't know it yet. These 2 teams aren't playoff teams. They're done. The loser and the winner. And I'll tell you what happens that next week. But I'm going to say the team that's at home. Home underdogs have been really successful for me this year, making a lot of picks. One of my favorite plays in the Cover 3 Locks Pod when we make them. This is yet another situation where Brian Kelly has had a tremendous amount of success playing at home. But more specifically, I look at the battle of quarterbacks going toe-to-toe. Jalen Milroe, last 4 games, 3 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, has not had a game where he's rushed over 50 yards in those 4 games, which is really, that's been his secret weapon. But the secret is out and teams are defending it. I think Garrett Nussmeier picks apart that Alabama secondary. I think he has more protection than he had against A&M where he struggled. I think they're healthier now. I like LSU not only to cover but to win this game outright.
Yeah, Brian Kelly at night in Tiger Stadium has been big. LSU at night has always been big. But I'm looking at Kalen DeBoer and the way that he's been able to approach some of the biggest games that they have had this season. And what Alabama has done in some of those biggest games is they've had really strong starts. Obviously, the Georgia one is the one that pops out at you, but I would throw Wisconsin in there. And the fact that the Crimson Tide held a touchdown lead at halftime in what was eventually a loss to Tennessee. I think that Jalen Milroe and that offense come in and they score on their first drive. So I like taking Alabama in the first quarter. I like Alabama in the first half as my best bet. You can find it at +1.5. So tied at halftime or Alabama leads are both winners. And again, all of this comes down to the same thing that had Kirby Smart so befuddled. And it was that Alabama came out with new looks, stuff they had been working on during the off week, ways to take advantage of the opposing defense. I think we see that again. Fast starting Tide get us a winner by halftime.
Okay, night game, Death Valley, and LSU getting points. I'm on Danny's side on that one. Let's go to a game that I think this is the smelliest spread of the week, and it's in the SEC. Chip, it's Oklahoma laying 2.5 points at number 24 Missouri.
Yeah, Oklahoma's playing better right now. To the point where I think Oklahoma fans are looking at their team and they're even more angry with their head coach that they weren't able to find this brand of football earlier in the season. I don't think that Oklahoma is spectacular, but I also don't think that Missouri is the 24th best team in the country. The reason why Oklahoma is favored is because the defense has always been salty. They found a little bit of rhythm offensively, and I like the Sooners to be able to go into Columbia and take out Missouri, win this game, and cover the spread.
Yeah, okay. Well, Chip, really impressed with that victory over Maine, I guess.
I am too, Chris. It sounds like you're a hater. I've been telling people on this show all season long, Missouri is the most overrated team in the country. I'm not changing my mind on that. The game against Maine, yes, it was a laugher against a lesser opponent, but Jackson Arnold's confidence starting to regain it with a couple touchdown passes. And more importantly, Javonte Barnes gets the ball going on the ground. 203 yards rushing, another couple touchdowns for him. Like Chip mentioned, getting back to more of a physical presence. And who the heck knows what Missouri's going to do, bouncing back, as held scoreless, issues at quarterback. What happens to Brady Cook? Does he play? I don't think it matters. I think Oklahoma goes in and wins and covers.
Yeah, I mean, I'm taking Oklahoma in that one too, just because I think the spread is just is wild,
stinky,
considering the way Oklahoma's played in the SEC at 1-4. Let's go to the Big Ten. It's the whiteout that Penn State wanted to do last week, but it was a noon game. Apparently, they can only wear white at night. They're at home against Washington, and they're coming off that loss to Ohio State.
Yes, that was a devastating loss. I thought the last 6 minutes of that game, not being able to score from the 5-yard line with 4 tries, and then not being able to get off the field was devastating for the Penn State Nittany Lions. This is the ultimate hangover game. How do you bounce back? And yes, they will have the home crowd, but Washington comes in as just a pesky opponent. That the record isn't great. Jed Fish has this team playing pretty solid. They've been up, they've been down. I think you get their best effort in this environment, and I think defensively is where it shows up. I don't have that much confidence. Penn State's offense, we've heard so much about this high-scoring offense, and they're going to get so much production. Where has it been? It's been one player, and it's been Tyler Warren. It's not that hard to stop if you can contain him and the 2 backs in the backfield, which I think Washington will do with some success. I think Washington will struggle to score, though, as well. Give me the under in the total this one. I'll take under 45.5.
Yeah, Penn State's offense is funny because they get enough yards that the analytics, like success rate, really like them, but it doesn't seem to translate into points on the scoreboard. Look no further than the fact that Penn State ranks number 123 in their over percentage in the betting markets. They rank number 114 in their over margin per game. They are falling short of the total by more than 4 points per game, except that Washington is number 127 in over percentage and number 125 in over margin per game. Gentlemen, these are 2 of the best under teams in the entire country. For to look at it from the other side, and I think it's because both teams can move the ball and both teams struggle to convert all of those yards into touchdowns on the scoreboard. I think we're going to see that again. You throw in Penn State having really good defense, you throw in hangover, you throw in Washington having to come all the way across the country after an emotional 4th down win against USC. A lot of this is pointing towards a lower scoring game and another under for both Penn State and Washington.
Last week, the first time Penn State's been held without an offensive touchdown in a decade, and the guys are fading that Penn State offense again. Chip Patterson and Danny Kanell coming back with more picks against the spread. Last week, we didn't have any late night games on Saturday, but we will have a couple this week. Boise State in action on Saturday night, trying to stay perfect in the Mountain West and move up those playoff rankings. Wrapping up our picks against the spread, two late night games of interest, including BYU unbeaten on the road at Utah, just 4-4, but that's the holy war. That's going to be a heated environment, and BYU is only a 3.5-point favorite. But let's start with Boise State right now in the driver's seat for that G5 spot, and only 3 spots behind BYU. So, I mean, if a Big 12 team slips up, they might end up with a bye if they win out. They're laying 24.5 at home against Nevada.
Lay 'em. Ashton Jeanty falling off that pace a little bit. I think that comes a factor as his team tries to keep him in the mix for that, Heisman Trophy race. I also think if the Nevada does load up the box, it opens up the door for that offense, which has been passing the ball really well too. Up and down the field, lay 'em. I also think Nevada can put up some points in this Boise State defense, so I like the over as well.
I like the Boise State team total over. Found this at 41.5. Nevada's defense statistically has been giving up a lot of points. And while I think that Jeff Choate, their new head coach, is a very good defensive mind, former DC at Texas, I think he'll have a decent game plan. But Danny, you mentioned it. What we have seen is the Mad Dog Maddox Madsen has really started to get some confidence in finding ways to have a counter to when teams load up the box. And that's important, because Boise State is not a team that just wants to be, that group of 5. It's nice to be here. Boise State would like to get into the college football playoff and win college football playoff games. You win this game big. You keep playing well. You mentioned it, Chris. Like, we could be talking about a bye. We could be talking about hosting a playoff game on the Smurf turf, but they got to be able to continue to have these big wins to impress the committee. I think part of that is scoring at least 42 points against the Wolfpack.
Style points in play for Boise. Let's go to the ACC. Pitt coming off their first loss of the season, laying 7.5 at home against UVA.
Big bounce back spot for them. That was a rough loss. I'm sure they wanted to represent better on the big stage against SMU. I do think they get it back coming home to Acrisure Stadium with the Pitt Panthers. I think this is a big spot for them to showcase what they're capable of and maybe even potentially make a case for a better bowl game at the end of the year. So I'm going to say Pitt gets it done coming back at home, wins and covers versus Virginia.
I'm a little bit worried about this Pitt offense. You go back to the Cal game, even the Syracuse game, though I understand that, they had all the pick sixes, so it was a little bit weird. But even a lot of the yards against SMU were what I would consider to be garbage time yards, because SMU had already established a big advantage. The offensive renaissance was something we loved at the beginning of the season, but I think that they've been a little bit figured out by opposing defenses. And Virginia, coming into this game out of an off week, might be able to find Pitt slipping just a little. I see that 7 and a hook. I saw this Virginia team be competitive when they were on the road against Clemson earlier this year. So I'm going to say Tony Elliott's group brings a lot of fight, a well-rested fight, and that Pitt maybe finds things a little bit more difficult to get the win. So I'll take Virginia plus 7.5.
Pitt, one of a handful of perfect teams that suffered their first defeats last week. Is it BYU this week going on the road to Salt Lake, where they've lost 5 straight trips there, Chip? They're 3.5-point favorites are the Cougars.
Yeah, vibes of all vibes plays here. I mean, there ain't no science, right? Because Utah has lost 4 straight. Utah has not scored 20 points in a football game since September the 21st. Utah's offensive coordinator resigned. He was so appalled with it. We don't have any good quarterback options, and I'm sitting here telling you to take Utah and all those points. I don't know why. I don't know how, but it just seems to be the setting. Salt Lake City, Rice-Eccles Stadium, the must. It seems to be the rivalry, the holy war, the kind of game that Utah can get fired up for. And through all the offensive struggles, The Utes defense, they've been playing their part. So a vibes play of all vibes plays here. I'm going to take Utah, and I will take those points.
I don't hate it. I think along the same lines as you. If I think about how it could happen, I think it would be ugly, and I think it would be low scoring. So give me the under in this one at Rice Eccles. Tough place to play. This is one of those salvage the season, throw out the records, rivalry games. I think Utah keeps this one close and keeps it low scoring.
Talking teams out west, maybe flying a little bit under the radar in the rankings, maybe looking at a potential playoff push like BYU, like Boise. Well, Boise's the only team to beat Washington State. They have one loss. They are ranked number 21 at home against Utah State as a 3-touchdown favorite.
And they are still listed in the standings column under the Pac-12, which is kind of wild when you think about
they're
it.
in first place?
Yeah, they are. So they actually do have wins, too, impressively over Texas Tech, which we'll see what Texas Tech does against Colorado, and Washington, a little rivalry from their old days in the Pac-12. They need style points, and I do think they get them against Utah State, which has really been struggling this season. John Mateer, the quarterback for Washington State, has really been solid this year. I think this is one of those games where you hate to run up the score, but you got to do what you got to do to try to creep your way up those standings to make a case to potentially be an at-large bid. Give me Washington State, lay the 20.5.
Well, listen, sometimes you have to start with the negative to figure out the positive. And I tell you what you're not going to do is you're not going to take Utah State to stay within 21 points of this ball game. I mean, Washington State will get to choose its number. And so because of that, yes, I'm going to take Washington State. I'm going to lay those points. This Utah State defense has been porous. You know, we have seen teams absolutely run it up against this Utah State defense. And even if John Mateer, who does make some mistakes from time to time, even if he catches a case of the whoopsie daisies over the course of 4 quarters, they're going to be able to establish a 3-touchdown lead. So at 20.5, the only sensible option is to take Washington State and lay these points.
A lot of games this week. Good luck to everybody. I think it might be a bounce back week for both Danny and Chip. We haven't seen both of you down at once, but that was the case last week. Chip 4-11, Danny 5-13. This week to the moon we go.
Let's go.
Saturday, we get you kick-started with the college football pregame live program. Danny, how did you get front and center on this program?
No, but I like it. I mean, that's what happens.
I don't know. They cut off the top of your head. It
When
kind
you
of
go
looks like you're bald.
5-13.
It looks like you're bald, doesn't it?
I would look good bald, though. I might have to lose it one day.
Shave that. Give us the horseshoe on the sides. Danny Kanell, Damian Harris, Mackenzie Brooks. Where the hell is Jordan Giorgio? How did she get kicked off of this thing? Yeah, you'll see her on Saturday mornings before the games kick off.